they're going to be for export. The issue is, what has this tobacco company given to the government in return? What sort of concessions have the government given to them? Who are really the owners? And these sort of issues, when you look up the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, you'll see that Grenada facilitating a tobacco company is not the right thing to do either. Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Roberts. We want to, at this time, welcome Ride Along Live, who has joined us. And then we want to encourage the listening audience, viewing audience, that they can, especially on Facebook, you can post your questions. If you have any questions for the panelists, please free to do so. Brother Gilchrist, on the chat, I was trying to find that question. There was someone who was asking to break down the budget into layman's terms. So maybe you could do some summarizing of the budget along those lines. Brother Gilchrist?
Yes. Allow me to, I'm just trying to pull up the budget itself, so I can just go through the summary of the budget. So you can give me a 5 minutes, so you can take somebody else while I put it up on the screen, so I can refer to it specifically.
Okay.
Give me
Junior,
2 minutes. Yeah.
Are you there, Junior?
Yes, I'm here.
Do you have any questions at this point or any?
No, at this point, I don't have any questions. I
Okay,
just joined in, so I'm just situating my broadcast. Okay. You're live and Ride Along Live at the moment.
Okay, welcome.
Brother Nick, if I should just add another, yes, I want to follow up on an issue that Sister Claudette raised with regards to the decriminalization, legalization of cannabis. Now, the ordinary man on the ground, to put it simply to them, the NDC has made a commitment to follow the recommendations provided by the CARICOM report that has done extensive research throughout the Caribbean to make it a first 100-day priority of putting the necessary legislation in place to decriminalize marijuana. We have a lot of examples from St. Vincent, Barbados, Jamaica, Belize, you name it, that have taken the steps in that direction. And we believe that this is a public health and social justice issue more than anything else. The evidence is out there that there are some negative consequences for moving in that direction as it relates to children who are exposed for prolonged periods of time. It is also saying that persons who have predisposed conditions of mental health problems can have a negative impact. However, it has shown that the medicinal value has outweighed and has been clarified now in the biggest way. The United Nations, at a meeting on the 3rd of December, a couple of weeks ago, have reduced the categorization of marijuana from the controlled substances, and the world has been moving in this direction. So Dr. Mitchell is known to have said for many times that this is not something that he's interested in pursuing. But now, because it's politically convenient, you're hearing them talk about it, but there is nothing said in the throne speech and very little included in the budget to show any seriousness about it. And they're going to be waiting closer to an election to make the hype about it. But when we see what happened to the Regis family recently in St. George Northwest, we see that how a family can be disrupted, their lives can go to tatters because of the issue of marijuana. And then, you know, the fact that the father ended up losing his life as a result of the stresses involved is a clear indication that this is not something that should have happened because of marijuana. So the NDC is clear. We are not trying to tell people things that is not consistent with the facts, with the evidence. There's enough research done globally, regionally, and we should be able to take the necessary action. So we wait to see what this government is going to do, but we know that they're going to be talking and waiting at the last minute. But the NDC is making the commitment to the Grenadian people that we are going to be moving forward to decriminalize marijuana and move towards looking at ways of creating an industry if needed. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Brother Nick.
Okay, so I'm ready now. I'm ready
Okay.
now. Mr.
All
Cox?
Okay, Ms. Joseph, you wanted to say something first?
Well, I just wanted to make the point. In the absence of our youth member, Tevin Andrews was advertised to be here, but at the last minute, unfortunately, something came up that really prevents him from showing up. And I would like just to make one point on behalf of the young people of Grenada. And that is, if you carefully examine the budget statement throughout, you would see that the government really makes no real provision for the young people that will propel them into prosperity and ensure that they have a fruitful, productive, and successful adult life and a comfortable and worry-free retirement when they reach that age. For example, apart from the minuscule treatment that agriculture has been given, nothing new is added to what was said in the past by way of information technology, for example. There are about 3 very scant and generalized paragraphs. That's paragraph 9.2.4 of the budget. I'm saying it so they can go and see for themselves, right? Just some very generalized areas. And the areas mentioned do not speak to using information technology to empower the youth and to cause them to grow wealthy and independent. The areas mentioned, although it says a pillar of growth, it speaks mainly to enabling ICT-related services, right? Enhancing government ICT-related services, but nothing at all about how you're going to use information technology to help the youth to become more independent and successful entrepreneurs. The NDC offers that it realizes, or we know, that ICT has basically created a global leveled playing field, a flat world, so that our young Grenadians, with the right investment from our government, would have identical opportunities to young Americans or young Chinese or young Indians. But the state has to engage in the investment. So that is why the National Democratic Congress expected something in the budget along the lines of investing in the young people as it relates to coding that would help create new ICT jobs, changes to our academic curriculum to make our young people more marketable in this new world. These are the things we were looking at. As we said in our 2018 manifesto, we hope that by now, especially with the changes that the pandemic has brought about, government would engage in some kind of processing outsource revolution that would provide support services for external businesses. So you train your people into ICT and coding and so, and you create a labor market right here in Grenada for external businesses, rather than having our young people stuck in the Imani program with no hope of advancement and promotion, and the same as the traffic wardens, environmental wardens, and Empower programs. Absolutely no hope for permanent employment and promotion. While there are opportunities out there that our government can seriously tap into to give our youth independence and prosperity. So I just wanted to make that point because I know Tevin would have loved to have made that point himself.
Thank you very much. Okay, Dr. Gilchrist, on the breakdown of the budget to layman's terms.
Yes, thank you very much. let's break it down. I would have liked to show it on the screen, but okay, let's not.
You can do a screen share.
No, I'm using a different computer
Oh, okay, I see.
Yeah. So that's why I can't really share, so people can see the actual figures. But before I get into the budget, let me just, give the listening public just a couple of facts of the economic realities that we are facing. Now, Grenada is an open economy. We depend a lot on imports. We import everything. I'll give you an example. Let's look at chicken, for example, poultry. We import on average every year over 20 million pounds of chicken. Right, last time I checked, it was about just over 20 million pounds of chicken. So that's one statistic. Now, herein lies opportunities. And you may ask the question, why is it that we are not self-sufficient or we don't have a thriving and viable local poultry industry? Why? But these are other issues of trade, but I just want to point out that fact. The second point I want to make by way of statistic, 80% of our foreign exchange earnings, right, comes from the tourism sector. So tourism is responsible for 80% of foreign exchange earnings. It never used to be like that when we have a thriving nutmeg, banana, cocoa industry. As you know, Grenada was the second largest producer of nutmeg before we had Hurricane Ivan. We haven't gotten back there yet. So 80% of our foreign exchange earnings is attributed to tourism. Now, think about it. The industry has collapsed because of COVID. Why am I making this point? Because these are some real challenges that we are facing now. Because if we import everything, when you import a car from Japan, you don't send EC dollars to pay for the car. You have to send US dollars. And to acquire the US dollars, you have to export to earn it. So this is not just typical to Grenada. The CARICOM is like this, hence the reason for the effort to keep the borders open and the effort to get tourism back on track, the effort to keep airlines flying. Because we have a problem in the region. We are too dependent on tourism. Going forward, we need to rebalance the economy. And Mr. Andrews spoke to the issue of agriculture and so on and so on. So I just want to put it on the table so you understand the context in which the budget is prepared. Heavy reliance on imports. So therefore, there's a heavy reliance on imports for revenue. So if we close the border, you know what happened to our revenue. And if our revenue dipped, the government's ability to pay its bills an issue. And when a government cannot pay bills, somebody come into the picture. And that somebody is the International Monetary Fund. They gave you money by way of a loan to help you pay your bills. But you know the same people you pay in bills are the same people you trade with. I'll just put that there and leave it there. So in terms of the budget for 2021, and a budget is just an estimate of your expenses for the next year. And then to support or to finance those expenses, we have the revenue side. So you have two sides to the budget. The revenue to finance your expenses. If you want to live beyond your means, that means that your expenses are greater than your revenue. You call that living beyond your means. In the budget statement, you will see a deficit. That's what I mean by your expenses beyond your revenue or your income. So in the budget for 2021, the government projected to raise by way of revenue in 1 year, $653.5 million. Tax revenue. They intend to raise that. Now, here what happened. This year, the budget fell short by $130 million. So the revenue this year was short by $130 million. Next year, they projected 653.5, which is more or less the same figure that they would have raised this year. So the revenue is flat. And we look into how they would raise that revenue. Now remember, tourism has taken a beating today by the incident that occurred. And a lot of revenue comes from tourism. And tourism has a lot of linkages, right? A lot of offshoot activities benefit from tourism. A lot of services, whether it's taxi or selling agricultural products or tour operators or whatever, they benefit. Maybe that today was not anticipated, but they had in mind raising $653.5 million. And here we have the incident today. So that's the revenue forecast, same as what we would have achieved this year. But a point I want to make, so your revenue is divided into two categories. Tax revenue, meaning income tax, value-added tax, but these are the two major taxes, and other taxes. And then you have non-tax revenue. Now remember, the minister in his budget statement said there are no new taxes. That's what he said, right? But I pointed to you that even though there are no new taxes, rates can change. The same tax you can tamper with the rate of the same tax, you know. You're not introducing a new tax, but you could tamper with the rate to give you more revenue. So even though he said there is no new taxes, it doesn't mean that taxes will not increase, all right? And if you get no money. So we have tax revenue, and then we have non-tax revenue. So what is projected? 653.5 million is collecting tax revenue. Non-tax revenue is 63.2 million, which is more or less what was collected this year. Now here what? Non-tax revenue speaks to what? Fees and license. You know, when you renew a driver's license, those are non-tax revenues. When you go to the hospital and do blood tests, and you pay your lab fees, those are non-tax revenue. Now hear what the minister said, that in 2021, the Revenue Department would take a fresh look at fees. Now, that was done under the IMF program. So if he's taking a fresh look at it again, I don't know. I don't know what else people can do. I mean, driver's license has increased, passport fees has increased. All these things have increased already. But if he's announcing that they're taking a fresh look at it, again, I anticipate that the population will see an increase in user fees for the services of government. I anticipate that. So this is revenue, and then you have capital revenue, where generally nobody, capital revenue means that you have to sell some asset to get capital revenue. Now, so government's revenue to finance the budget is, as I said, recurrent revenue from tax and non-tax, and there's a big one. Our next component are revenue called grants, revenue grants, capital grants. And this time, there's a huge projection of $243.6 million. It's a first for Grenada that we have projected so much to receive from capital grants. I mean, classifying that. Now, this is not a loan. This is money that you receive that you don't have to pay back. It's a gift. It's a grant. It's huge. And that $243.6 million helps the revenue projection to be $917.1 million. Now, you would have thought that, okay, so if that's your estimate of how much you would raise in revenue and then gives grants, that you now go and finance it, you now go and plan your expenditure. But we will see later on that the expenditure plan is more than the revenue. And when I speak of expenditure, a big component of your expenditure is debt servicing. Debt servicing alone is surpassed over $200 million a year. It's a huge burden. And then we hear that in the budget, that debt stock would increase because of the airport loan and some other loans that they would take. So debt obligation is rising, or revenue is flat. So the government does have a challenge in financing the budget. Now, so our total revenue, $917 million, including grants. Our total expenditure, $859 million. So it's less, total expenditure. And the total expenditure is divided into your wage bill. And the wage bill here is around 277.7 million. This year, the wage bill is put at 265. So there's a small increase in the wage bill. And sometimes that can be accounted for increments and all of that. But I'll make a point on the wage bill later on because there are some issues in the budget regarding vacancies, and then the union was asked before any agreed increase in wages. So the wage bill of government is 277.8 million. After that, another big expense is goods and services, stationery and supplies to support the work of the ministries and departments. Then you have interest payment. That's just the interest component of our debt. $63 million budgeted, so approximately $5 million a month has to go to interest payments. I'm not just talking about paying back on the principal, interest payment. And then we have transfers, $166 million, which is support to statutory bodies and like Greater Food and Nutrition Council, Greater Brewer Standard. So these are statutory bodies that don't generate any substantial income. TAMCC, TAMCC gets over 12 million a year. They would argue it's not sufficient. So these components are a major item on the expenditure. And then you have the capital expenditure. And this time they are projecting to spend over $305 million in capital expenditure. This year, we only spent $122 million out of a budget of 225. So we fell short. And since I've been around over 26 years around the Ministry of Finance, we have never spent more than 60% of our budgeted capital expenditure. Yet we are projecting 305.6 million. So because of that huge capital expenditure, this is why the budget in total is approximately $1.2 billion. That is why we get to $1.2 billion, because of that huge spending of $305.6 million. So remember, we budgeting to spend $1.2 billion. We're raising in revenue alone under $1 billion. Total revenue and grants is 970. That's under $1 billion. Where the rest will come from? So right at the end of the budget, they have a financing gap in red. And of course, it was said that, of course, you have to resort to borrowing to fill the gap. Now, this is a scenario that is placed for 2020-21. A budget where a heavy reliance on capital expenditure. The source of financing that capital expenditure is not the revenue raised from taxes, but grants from CBI funds. 60% of CBI funds will go towards financing the capital expenditure. Now, there are a lot of issues here because one wonders whether or not the procurement rules would be strictly adhered to. Now that the capital expenditure is financed locally, as opposed to when you get a loan from the World Bank or other international financial institutions, they have very, very strict rules for project implementation. So the issue is, do we have the human and resource capacity to adhere and to be disciplined enough to get value for money as we finance our capital expenditure locally? So that's an issue, and whether or not we even have the capacity. And Mr. Andrews will speak to what I call the absorptive capacity. There is so much you can spend as a small country. There is so much you can spend. Do we have the capacity to spend $305 million in 1 year, starting January? In 1 year, it has never been done in history. Yet they said it's a budget of hope. And we see that there's a freezing of vacancies within the government service. In health alone, 85 vacancies have been frozen in health, in the Ministry of Health. Well, the argument is that these are positions that are vacant, nobody is there. But if you scrutinize it carefully, a position like health planner is frozen. So you wonder whether or not there is a critical look at your skills within the ministry and whether or not the government should have engaged in a realignment of skills and expertise and competencies to realize the objectives of those ministries. But yeah, they're just a blanket freezing of positions. So even though it's vacant, sometimes it could be necessary. Look for the skills, look for the expertise, touch the diaspora, bring in the people that are with the skills, experience, and expertise that will drive this country forward. But if we keep putting square pegs in wrong holes, we ain't gonna get anywhere. We're gonna come back to the same problem. So this is a budget in a nutshell. Our expenses as projected, greater than our revenue, so the budget is, a shortfall. Where would that shortfall come from? The government has said loans, they would borrow to finance the shortfalls. And you know what happens when you borrow? If you start borrowing and borrowing and borrowing, you have less money to put towards spending on domestic activities that would impact people's lives. This is one of the sins of high debt. You're unable to feed yourself because all the money has to go towards debt. And if I ask a simple question, just assume you're in my class now, my economics class, and I ask you, if you have a local business, what is the employer's first obligation at the end of the month? Is it to pay his creditors or is it to pay his employees? You have so much money. What's your first obligation? I just leave the public to think about it. And many governments are forced to have as their first obligation paying their creditors, servicing your debt. But think about it. And you know what happened to the viability of the business. So this is a nutshell, is the budget. You would think, based on what I presented, is this hope? And those of us that read the Bible, hope, and if you talk about hope without works is dead, eh? Right? So you have to have substance that would build hope and give people confidence. And also, in closing, on this point, the issue of rebalancing the economy. We have to, COVID has taught us, we have to move away from this heavy reliance on the tourism industry. It's too heavy. Combined tourism is up just over 40% of the entire economy. There's too much a heavy reliance. We have to rebalance it as a way of preparing our economy to handle economic shocks. It's what we call economic resilience. And it also helps in terms of reducing poverty. Now, I haven't even touched on the issue of poverty and how you deal with that. That's another lecture, another story. Okay, so this is what I want to say. I don't want to take up all the time.
Well, Nick, if I could just add something here, to put something in a nutshell. This budget was a legal requirement that this government had to do. And they actually came and presented something to make it sound good. But for those of us who understand the details of the budget, it clearly is not something that gives hope to the Grenadian people. It is not something that is focused on people. It is focused on a hope that tourism will rebound. And we see, based on the Sandals issue tonight, that this is not the case. So I want the Grenadian people to realize that this was just a performance to achieve a legal objective, and there is no substance to really give us any direction for 2021.
Well said, Brother Roberts.
Yeah.
I'm going to move to Brother Andrews. He had some extra things to say, and I do want him to expound a little on our loan obligations. The questions out there.
Yes, well, but before I do that, I want to complete the analysis that Mr. Grip started, because I said initially that a budget, when it's been presented, must be presented in three parts.
Brother Andrews, sorry to interrupt you, but could you just push yourself away from your screen a bit? We are seeing like half of your face.
Right.
Or maybe you should tilt it down, tilt your screen down a bit. Yes, that's right. Thank you.
Right. So the budget is presented in three parts. And if you go back to budget 2010, 27, 28, you will see those three parts there. Now, in the last line, we see an overall balance, including grants. Yes? And that overall balance is the difference between your total revenue and your total expenditure. Now, in 2020, the government had an overall surplus of 145.8, and I must say that is good. That is good fiscal performance. In 2021, they projecting an overall deficit of $18.2 million. So in other words, your total expenditure exceeded your total revenue by $18.2 million. Now that means that you have a deficit. To make your budget balance, to balance your budget, what you have to do is to show what is going to happen to that $18.2 million minus. How to make it positive, so that when you add it two together, it ends up being zero, a balanced budget. Now that's a part of the budget that is called financing, and which is not shown in the estimates of revenue and expenditure, and which should be shown. It should be shown because it reveals other information about the fiscal performance, which is not reflected in above, right? So, for example, when you look at recurrent expenditure, the line says recurrent expenditure, and in bracket it says excluding principal repayments. Now, what is principal repayments? Principal repayments are parts of your debt servicing. Your debt servicing has two parts. It has interest payments and it has principal repayments. Now you show interest payments, as you see there, 67 million in 2020 budgeted, 63.7 million in 21 budgeted, right? The principal repayment is not shown, but it is shown below when you go into financing your capital, your overall deficit. And in 2021, your principal repayments amounted to $297.3 million. Yeah. So what it means is that if you were to add that to your recurrent expenditure, it will increase by that amount. So you have to show that below. The other thing about the financing is your unpaid claims in the treasury. There could be, but let me explain what is an unpaid claim. An unpaid claim is a check printed, signed, but not delivered. It is not delivered because you wouldn't have the cash to back it up. So if you give the person the check and they go to cash it, it could be bounced. And the government don't want that to happen. So you keep it there until you have sufficient cash. Yeah? Now, when you're doing your financing, you have to show as well what is the situation with your unpaid claims, how much unpaid claims you have, what amount of checks signed but not delivered. Now, I know that that figure could be as high as $100 million, yeah? And that is shown up there. Now, what that means is that when a government tells you it's going to spend 1.3 or 1.3 billion, 1.4 billion, whatever the figure is, for the next year, chances are the first set of money it gets, it may use that money to try and pay the unpaid claims, because it will mean that it have money there for people in the country that it has not paid. Yeah, it haven't paid those monies. And then it may want to pay them. So it would slow the implementation of the budget in the following year, because you have a lot amount of unpaid claims that you have not paid. And these two important information are being shown up in the financing section. Another information to show up is there is a reserves. Is a reserves. I heard the Prime Minister speak some time ago and saying that in this COVID period, fortunately we had reserves. Now the reserves will be shown up under the financing section. How much reserves do we have? We do not know. So that additional information is important because they explain and they tell us the real financial strength of the government. Because in any case, a surplus, an overall surplus could be wiped out by simply your principal repayment or simply by your unpaid claims. And in that regard, you have no money available for your reserves. Now, the thing about the budget also is the capital expenditure. Capital expenditure is what you would normally use to help to grow the economy. And maybe that's why there's a focus on capital spending, because capital spending and growth are very positively correlated. Good, and that makes economic sense. Now, how do you finance a capital program? You can finance a capital program by one, your current account surplus. What is your current account surplus? Your current account surplus is the difference between your current revenues and your current expenditure. In 2021, they have a current account balance of $23.9 million. Good? Now, in truth and in fact, this budget does not explain what that money is going to be used for, you know. Because when you look at how they finance the capital program, they have a $17 million as local financing, which is supposed to be really and truly the current account surplus. But that $17 million come from capital revenues. Good. So that $23.9 million is left unexplained in the budget. And normally, that $23.9 million is being used as counterpart financing for your capital program, in particular your loans. Because when a funding agency finances a particular project, they don't finance it 100%. They may say, I will give you 80% and the remaining 20% you put it. And to show that you could put it, you must have a current account surplus, right? So you could finance a capital program from a current account surplus. You could finance a capital program by having capital grants, good. And if these two are not enough, or you could also get your capital revenues by selling government assets. But if these three are not enough, what you do is that you will have to borrow. Yeah, you will have to borrow. And therefore, to control your borrowing, what you have to do is to decide on a level of capital spending that is in fact realistic. That is in fact very much realistic, yeah? Because every time you go borrowing, what you do is that you increase the country's debt. Now, the debt has gone up. When you look at the debt, I'm speaking here about the total government's debt. The total debt has increased. You have the capital program is being financed from loans of $40-something million alone in 2021. So that will bring up your debt stock by that amount. And then you have the other loans, the Chinese loans that you're going to disburse $100-something million, right? That will be disbursed down the road. Good. All of that will increase the debt stock. But the thing about your debt is that your debt should be used to finance capital expenditure. You shouldn't borrow money for your recurrent spending. You shouldn't borrow money to pay salaries, for example. That is not good borrowing. Put the money into building roads, into building schools, into building hospitals. Those things will facilitate economic growth. Yeah? So as long as you continue to borrow for recurrent spending, you are putting the country into more debt, and therefore the GDP that you want to generate from these activities would not be there. Good? So our debt to GDP ratio has now gone up to somewhere around 70-80% with those new borrowings. Good. When the benchmark that we're supposed to have as acceptable internationally should be around 60%. So we are in a real tight spot going forward with all this borrowing. I've already said the point that we cannot borrow ourselves. We cannot borrow ourselves from debt. To solve our debt problem, we have to grow our gross domestic product. Our GDP must grow because it's a numerator over a denominator. The numerator is debt, the denominator is GDP. So the bigger the GDP is relative to the numerator, it becomes easier for you to manage your debt to GDP ratio. It will come down. But as long as your numerator keeps growing faster than your denominator, your debt to GDP ratio will rise. And that's the problem that I'm seeing happening now with this consistent and heavy borrowing that we know going into.
Thank you. Thank you. Junior, are you there? Okay, Sister Claudette Joseph, we're going to move into you for your presentation.
Oh, okay. Yes, but we have the other platforms. I don't know if there are questions on the other platforms because
okay. Of course, right.
Nike and our Facebook page.
Right. I haven't gotten anything right now. I kind of the ones from the Facebook page I passed on already. What's the other platform?
Oh, you passed on the ones on the Facebook page.
Right.
Yes. So I wanted to make a point that we hear our expert here, our experts, both of them, as they plug holes into the budget, as they show us missing parts, missing figures, figures that don't add up. And we realize it's not a budget that we can rely on. But I also want to point out another aspect of the budget that shows our government's misplaced priorities. So, for example, we have a situation in Grenada where we do not have a proper court building, and we do not have a proper archive for our records, whether it's our historic records or our deeds and land registry records. And the National Democratic Congress was in the advanced stages of building a structure on Archibald Avenue when it demitted office. And that project was discontinued by this current government. Again, we had an opportunity about a year and a half ago to purchase a building in town, the RBTT, the old RBTT building, which could have temporarily but comfortably host all the courthouses and the archive for the deeds and land registry. That was passed upon, and that building was just only over $4 million. Yet, the government is about to spend over $3 million to repair traffic lights when there are dozens of traffic wardens on the road very adequately directing the traffic. Well, we know they have put the traffic wardens in a difficult position where they have them doing stuff that they can't legally do. But direct traffic, they are there. So the question is, do we need to spend $3 million on traffic lights? Or do we need to spend $4 million or $4.5 million on a proper courtroom and a proper vault and archive? I'm going to share my screen. And what you're going to see here, viewers, are some images taken recently, about last week. And those show the state of our archive. Those are our deeds, those are our records, our irreplaceable records at the Deeds and Land Registry. And that's the vault. You see that piece of paper on the ground there? That's a piece of a conveyance, a record. So if you ever had a land transaction to do, for example, or a deed to do, and your lawyer told you, I can't guarantee you the accuracy of the research. I'm not sure if the land you're going to buy is encumbered or not. This is what your government is doing or not doing with your tax dollars. This is how your government is not taking care of it. Those are deeds, these are records. And the records go back to the 1700s, cannot be replaced. This is the current state of the records at the registry. And our government refuses to spend $4 million to purchase a building that would house a new vault. And in addition to this, our government let a project started by the former NDC administration, funded by the World Bank, which would have digitized all of these archives here, computerized those, given work to young people. This project was allowed to discontinue. And in our national budget, no accommodation is made for our justice system or for the Supreme Court in terms of enhancing the archives, rectifying this dire problem we have here, providing physical facilities for the justice system. And this is in the midst of what Tobias Clement, the opposition leader, calls the emergence of a creeping dictatorship. And he would know because he has been in the belly of that beast for over 30 years. So I just wanted to share with you how misplaced the priorities are and the fact that this government talk all the sexy talk. And I'm asking you, the people listening, not to believe all the sexy talk and the pie in the sky figures and numbers. But these are the realities that we face in Grenada. These are the realities. I just thought I would make that point. To put into context the economic analysis that our experts have given. Let's bring it down to our grassroots people and how it affects you. Right? This is what causes you to run the risk of buying a piece of land from somebody who has already sold that piece of land, and your lawyer was not negligent in finding out that. What it means is that the records at the registry just did not permit the lawyer to do a proper search to see that you are buying a piece of land that's already encumbered. So you might end up having to pay the bank a loan for a piece of land that you actually don't own. So viewers, when we talk about priorities and the budget not being in sync with our reality and what our government should be doing for us, these are the real examples. Thank you.
Thank you. We have another question from, before we go to Junior, we have another question from the Facebook page. This is from Marilyn Campbell. Mr. Andrews, help the citizenship understand and appreciate the total debt as of December 2020, because Grenada debt to GDP ratio moved from 107% in 2007 to 56% in 2020. Do not tell the real and truthful story about Grenada's debt. Is it true that Grenada for the past 14 years been borrowing over $60 million each year on RSM/ECSE?
Yeah, well, I don't have all the figures before me, because in the estimates there is a section that details all of the domestic and the external debt that the country has. So we'll have to go into that section to see the full extent of the country's debt. But let me explain the debt that the country has. It could either be domestic debt or it could be external debt. A domestic debt is a debt that you borrow from local people, institutions, businesses, okay? Nowadays, long ago, you will go straight to them, but not nowadays. Those debts, you have to go to the Regional Government Securities Market, the RGSM, since it has been established. So you go there and you issue what is called a prospectus, and then you can go there to borrow money. But most of that debt is being used for recurrent spending to meet wages and salaries, goods and services, interest payments, and so on. Good? So that's your that's your domestic debt. And a big part of it is hardcore, because every year you keep borrowing just for that purpose. Good? The other aspect of it is your external debt. And most of your external debt are for your capital development programs. That is money you borrow from the IMF. Well, the IMF is a little bit different. I'll explain that just now. The IMF, the World Bank, the Inter-American Development Bank, you borrow from the Caribbean Development Bank, or it could either be, you call that multilateral financial institutions, okay? But you could also borrow from countries, right? Like you borrow from China now, you call it a bilateral debt, okay? So you have the external debt, which consists of multilateral and bilateral, and you have the domestic debt. And all of them together will give you your total debt. But that's for the central government. But on the other hand, you also have your statutory bodies, like the Airport Authority, like NAWASA, okay? Like MNIB. Now, when these institutions borrow, in most cases, they borrow on a particular condition. And the condition could be that the government would guarantee the debt, which means that if they fail to meet their financial commitment with the institution, the government will step in and make the payment. Yeah. So when you add the debt of the statutory bodies and the debt of the central government, you get your total consolidated debt of the country. Good? And that could be somewhere about $1.4 billion. Now, some time ago, the government was able to go to its creditors and negotiate and get two things happen. One, they got what is called a haircut. A haircut simply means that the principal amount was reduced. Okay, so they got a principal haircut, and they get also restructuring, debt forgiveness and restructuring. Now that could bring down the actual debt stock. And when you bring that down, when you put that over the GDP, the number could fall. So one of the reasons why the debt to GDP ratio went down was because the government was able to negotiate a haircut or negotiate rescheduling and so on, and that is okay. That is okay. The other point about the debt is that a debt could be an immoral debt. Oh, by the way, I want to make a point about the IMF debt. Most of the IMF loan is for what they call balance of payment support. And most of that money goes into, it really goes for recurrent spending. I would never advise the government to rush into quickly an IMF debt because it doesn't go really into development purpose. So if you're borrowing from the CDB, it will be for some infrastructure project. That is good debt to take. If you're borrowing from the World Bank, that is good debt to take because it's for development purposes. But in most cases, the IMF is for what they call balance payment support, and in most cases, it goes into things like salary support or income support. The recent debt we had, the recent drawing we get from the IMF was really for income support, right? And if it's for income support, if it's for salary support, what it means is that only a few persons benefit from that debt. The money went to give individuals a few income support, but when you're paying back the debt, all of us paid back, and our future generations paying it back too. So a debt could be immoral. It could be immoral when you borrow for recurrent spending. On the other hand, at the same time, when all of us have to repay that debt. All right. So over the years, we've been able to bring down the debt to GDP ratio because of the restructuring that we got and the principal haircut that we got. But what we see now happening is that the debt to GDP ratio going back up to the extent we are doing some more heavy borrowing, right? And therefore, to resolve that problem, what we have to do is focus on domestic production, increase our output, our GDP, make that denominator grow and grow fast by producing more. Good. So we have to turn to debt to meet our needs and therefore stabilize our economic situation.
Okay, thank you. Any other statements from, or do we have any other questions coming in?
Just to make a point, Brother Cox, the total debt based on my own calculation from what the government is presenting is about 2.1 billion, just over 2 billion.
$2.1 billion.
Yeah, just around there. That's the total debt, and the total gross domestic product is just around 3 billion. Right? The value of all.
Repeat the GDP.
Yes, just around 3 billion.
3
billion.
Billion GDP. Okay.
An approximation. I'm just rounding it up because GDP has its problems with measurement, right?
Okay.
All right. So if for example, we now legalize the marijuana industry, it will not be added to the GDP, right? We can't add it before because it's not a legitimate activity. But as you bring it into account, your GDP would rise, and you can collect taxes on it. So Caribbean countries getting into the marijuana business, apart from the medicinal reasons, there's also the revenue reason too. It's not an activity you could now tax and get some legitimate revenue.
Yeah, I want to just say something about the GDP and the importance of the GDP. Now, GDP means gross domestic product, right? Gross domestic product. It means the output that we in Grenada, all of us who living in this country, it is what we work and produce. So if all of us were to do nothing, don't work at all, and don't produce anything, then there is no GDP. If all of us work and all we produce is 10 pounds of nutmeg, then that 10 pounds of nutmeg is our GDP. Yeah? So the GDP is extremely important. If our economy was a closed economy, it was closed. In other words, we have no friends to help us. Good? And all we produce was 100 pounds of potato, then that is our GDP. And that 100 pounds of potato is what has to be shared among us as a people. That's all we have to eat. Yeah? So the GDP gives us a sense as a nation of our productivity, of our work attitude, of our ability to work and to produce. Good? And the more the GDP rise, the more we produce, the more we have to feed ourselves and to look after ourselves. Good? That is why unemployment is not good for our country, because unemployment is saying that we have people who could work and produce, but they're not producing. They're not working, so they're not producing. So unemployment is not good for our country. Yeah? So our country must first and foremost focus on increasing its gross domestic product. Put our people to work. Put our people to work and to produce, to feed ourselves and to look after ourselves. Good? But of course, I mean, there are issues with the GDP. You have nominal GDP and you have real GDP and all that kind of thing. But that is the concept of the GDP. Without that GDP, we have no economy. We have no country. So that's the importance of it. It's a reflection of our productivity as a nation and as a people. And therefore, we should make every effort to always put our people to work, let them work and produce. The more persons we have working and producing, the more will be our output, the more will be our GDP, the more we have to eat and to consume, the higher will be our living standard, and we'll be a much happier people. That's the importance of the GDP.
Yeah.
Okay, and so in a nutshell, what would you say is the how should I put it? Our GDP is comprised of what sectors put most into our GDP?
Right. So the GDP is
comprised, the top three.
Right. So we have agriculture, tourism, and construction. These are the three. Right. Now, government services also is a big part of our GDP. In fact, I think it's about the biggest part of our GDP right now in terms of employment generation. Good. But in terms of real GDP, output GDP, right? You have to look at agriculture, manufacturing, tourism, construction. These are the ones that will give you your real GDP, your output, your real GDP. The others are more or less services GDP.
Thank you. Sister Claudette.
Yes. And in fact, the final comment I would have fits in very nicely with the last point Brother Andrews just raised about the importance of putting our people to work and therefore enhancing our GDP. Because as we learned tonight, and we always hear the Prime Minister and economists and so speak of the importance of the debt to GDP ratio. When we ask the Prime Minister what the national debt is, he says, you don't need to know that. Once you could pay it back. What is important is the debt to GDP. All right, the debt to GDP ratio. And as it stands now, based on what the minister said in his presentation, there is expected to be a spike in the debt to GDP ratio by 13%. And this would put us over the accepted limit of the debt to GDP ratio. Unfortunately, we do not see in the budget a corresponding policy platform that will ensure that more Grenadians are put to work so that our GDP improves. What we are urging the government And what an NDC government will focus on is agriculture as a big platform. You listen to the Minister of Agriculture presentation, and he definitely is in another planet. He's in a completely different realm from the Minister of Finance who read the budget, because you have the same 2% allocated for agriculture and agriculture-related activities, just as in previous years. So that tells all of us that there is no intention on the part of government to enhance agriculture and agricultural production. What we in the NDC are saying needs to happen is that steps need to be taken to restore Grenada to global leadership in the production of nutmeg and cocoa and other spices, to return us to the stature of the true spice isle of the world. That's one thing we have to do. And hijacking the GCNA and the Grenada Cocoa Association is not the way to achieve that. Secondly, we urge our government to provide support for our farmers, including our poultry and livestock farmers, and especially our poultry farmers. That will significantly reduce our food import bill, because our import of poultry alone is several $1 million. I do not know the figure offhand, but it's a lot. And our total food import bill is in excess, well in excess of 100 million, while our exports is under 40. Not under 40, under 50. So we're in the mid 40s in terms of revenues we get from export, and we are in the 100 millions in terms of monies we send out for importing goods into Grenada. So providing support for our farmers, including our poultry and livestock farmers, will significantly help to reduce that food import bill and also provide employment, thereby improving our GDP. We urge our government to support entrepreneurs who are involved in agro-processing and other related services or production of other like commodities. And in keeping with that, and I'm sure this next point will resonate with a lot of people listening, set up a predial larceny court. We have a serious problem here. Every now and then we listen to the news and we see stories of farmers in distress because their crops were either destroyed or stolen. People come in and reap what they did not plant. And the NDC strongly urges the establishment of a predial larceny court that will help to tackle that issue of predial larceny that our farmers suffer. Fishing. We encourage our authorities to provide avenues for partnership and to build partnership with local and foreign entities to engage in deep sea cage fishing. Really, we need to exploit our marine resources. And while we're at it, talking about marine resources, we also say that includes oil and gas. I hear the minister in the budget speech announcing that the only country in the Caribbean that will see growth this year is Guyana. You know why? Because of the oil and gas sector. Had this government treated with our oil and gas differently, he would have been reporting 2 countries only in the region seeing growth. That would have been Grenada and Guyana. But unfortunately, they did a dirty deal with our oil and gas, and so we are not in that bracket. So we are advocating the proper exploitation of our resources beneath the sea. And again, placing food security at the top of the priority list. There is no way around it, especially given the impact of the pandemic on our economy and on the lives of our people. We want a government that would tangibly touch the lives of people, not in a way that would keep them in a dependency cycle, but in a way that would lift them up permanently out of poverty into prosperity. So those are the points I would like to make at this point. And I imagine you expect these to be my closing points?
Yes.
Right. So yes?
Say that again?
No, if you expected these to be my closing points, I would just have taken the opportunity now to say thanks.
Hold on a second. Let me get a question from Junior George first. Right Along Live.
Yeah. Okay. So we're here. Thank you guys for allowing us the option to ask our question here. Our question is to Claudette, and it has to do with the legalization of marijuana. And for that question, I turn to our immigration lawyer, Ms. Dione Winter-Funde. Dione?
I am here. Good evening, members of the panel. I hope you can hear me. I will take a nod as a yes.
We're hearing you, yes. Loud and clear.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak. I am Dione Winter-Funde. I'm an immigration law attorney based here in the state of Florida. And also I have an immigration show on Right Along Live every Wednesday. I'm curious when I see states moving towards the legalization of marijuana. In fact, outside states or states within the US, we have this weird entanglement here in the United States with marijuana legalization. And specifically, my interest is how it affects intending immigrants. Legalization of marijuana in the United States is not new. So a lot of states have been moving in that direction, including Colorado. We've seen it in the state of Florida here where I am. The problem I am having, and I'll pose this as a statement question, Ms. Claudette, the problem I'm having is state law that they legalize marijuana, it's all good. However, immigration law is federal, and it's still a crime under federal law, and immigration law is federal, to sell, possess, produce, grow, or distribute marijuana. It comes into a problem area for intending immigrants, green card holders, or those on the island of Grenada who at some point want to migrate to the United States. They have to answer these questions in the affirmative if they have used, produced, sell, even if they worked in a store and didn't partake. So long as they have been involved in the production, the selling, the distribution, the possession of marijuana, this can lead to them being found inadmissible to the United States. So that's problem number one. I wanted to know how the state, how Grenada is addressing that as it pertains to the legalization of marijuana.
Okay, thanks for the question. Well, two things. There are two aspects to how the issue of marijuana is treated with. And the NDC proposes both in varying degrees. The first aspect is the decriminalization of marijuana. And we propose that to possess, as you say, it's the position federally in the US, it is still the position in Grenada also, that to possess marijuana in any quantity is a criminal offense, which could land you in jail or with a fine or both. So our proposal is for the possession of marijuana for recreational purposes be decriminalized in small quantities. In most Caribbean islands that have done it so far, it is around between 2 and 3 grams. And a number of islands have done it. Trinidad, Belize, Jamaica, St. Vincent is on the way, Turks and Caicos, a whole host of other, Barbados is well advanced doing it. So we are not alone in this regard. In fact, in many respects, we are coming from behind. Now, the other aspect is the legalization of marijuana. And the way the legalization works is that the state makes it no longer an offense to trade or process marijuana, either in most instances for medicinal purposes, and in some instances for, you're selling to users, small users. Now, when you make application for a green card, for example, and before I say when you make application for a green card, before I go into that, I hear recently that President-elect Biden and Senator Harris, they are inclined to treat with this on a federal level. I saw a report recently to that effect. So I think the move in the US itself will be to decriminalize and legalize on a federal level. But in terms of as it stands now, when you answer these questions, you fill out your questionnaire in support of an application for a visa or a green card, you usually are given an opportunity to explain if your answer is yes. There's usually a part of the form where you can explain yourself. And if your answer is yes, and yes because in your country of origin, it is legal to possess marijuana in small quantities, or it is legal to acquire a license or a permit to run a marijuana shop, I don't see that having an adverse impact on an application, because you're showing that you did it, but you did not do it in contravention of any law in the country where you operated. So I really don't see it as creating a problem for people who would subsequently make application for visas or green card. I hope I answered your question.
And thank you for answering. And I'm not going to disagree with you, but I'm going to say that is not the case. The moment they answer in the affirmative, in many cases, and I have cases like that, where the possession is over, for example, 20 grams. So we're talking about the selling, the possession, the production, the growth, they will be found inadmissible to the United States as it stands, right? Yeah. So I'm hoping,
what I'm saying to you is that there's no jurisdiction in the Caribbean so far that has legalized or decriminalized marijuana that goes beyond 2 or 3 grams. So if they did possess it in as many as 20 grams, it means that they were in fact committing a crime. And in terms of the legalization aspect, what has happened, for example, in St. Vincent and Jamaica, in fact, most of the companies that are engaged in the processing of marijuana for medicinal purposes, because that is the context in which it has been legalized in St. Vincent and Jamaica, for example, most of them are actually foreign entities, right? So it's processing to be included in medicine and so. So I don't know that would necessarily present a problem, because remember, it is still criminal in certain quantities. The decriminalization in all cases refer to small quantities. You go above a certain amount, say in Trinidad, I think it's 3 grams, in Jamaica it's 2 grams. You go above that and you are in fact committing a crime.
Sister Claudette, correction, is not grams, it's ounces. In Jamaica it's 2 ounces, in Trinidad it's 1 ounce, and it's not 2 and 3 grams. It's an ounce, and in Jamaica it's 2 ounces.
No, I don't think that's correct, but say what?
That's a figure, yes.
Yeah.
Whatever the number is.
Yeah. But
Okay.
the point I'm making is that it's in a specific quantities.
So I guess anyway, that means that our citizenship has to be educated about, especially for those who need to travel, educated about the laws of the countries that they are traveling to know how they behave based on their desire to travel in the future.
Absolutely. I think it's important that when you're considering the decriminalization, and you're making my point that you have to educate the citizens. In fact, here and with all my clients, I tell them stay away from the selling, the growth, the possession. If you have, because not everybody has the intention to immigrate, but if you have an intention to immigrate to the United States, you cannot be entangled with marijuana at any level. It's going to prove a problem. So I just want us to keep that in mind when we're having these discussions, to make sure we're educating all involved. So I thank you for making that point, sir.
Thank you very much.
Brother Nick, could I just say one thing to the sister? I want you to acknowledge, though, that the issue of immigration to the U.S. is a tiny, tiny piece of the issues related to marijuana illegality in countries like Grenada. When you have young men who are picked up, the people who are poor and impoverished that can't pay the bail when they're picked up and end up in jail and become criminals there. The people, we just had a situation where a young man got shot, his father got irritated, he dying too. So the issues of immigration, while I understand is something if somebody wants to migrate, the concern for people who live in Grenada, especially the youth, and there are a lot of people who are in their 40s and the 50s who have gone through the criminal system because of a spliff. We have to acknowledge that this is a social justice issue that is so much bigger than immigration. Thank you, though.
Thank you. Okay, we're gonna go to closing statements now, and we will start with Claudette Joseph. Let's Claudette.
But yeah, I was saying earlier that the comments I made with regard to enhancing government need to pay more attention to agriculture as a means of ensuring sustainable development of our people. Those were my closing comments. I am just here trying to pull up the document on marijuana. What I am not seeing. Just want to make sure.
Yeah, trust me, Sister Claudette, it's 2 ounces in Jamaica and otherwise. But anyway, should I go ahead and make my closing statement, Brother Nick?
Yes, you can do that. Yes.
All right. Sisters and brothers, I want to really make the clear statement that the budget that the government presented for 2021 is a sham. They have, as I said, completed a legal obligation, but that budget is not really something that can be implemented as presented. It is not going to make much of a difference to Grenada than 2020 has impacted on us. And I certainly believe that this government has shown a lack of vision, a lack of understanding of the needs of the people. And by not emphasizing the importance of things like agriculture, we need to really highlight that they're not really meeting the needs of the people. In terms of healthcare, we have seen a continuation of the status quo, and we really want to say that the NDC is committed to an improved healthcare system based on primary healthcare, based on reducing the amount people pay out of pocket, based on having a close dialogue with our health workers, especially our nurses and physicians who are in the front line with this COVID experience. And we want the government to be transparent and truthful with regards to the COVID pandemic, treat everybody with the same standards, protect our borders to reduce the risk of COVID entering, and let us hope that this current situation with COVID in the country does not go into a more serious situation than it already is. So I want to continue to advise people to take the necessary precautions. Don't go out if you don't have to, and when you do go out, wear your mask, sanitize, because those who were in contact with the positive patients from the Sandals incident might have encountered you in some way. So protect yourself, protect your families, and let's be safe. Thank you.
Thank you. Sister Claudette, Joseph?
Yes.
You're done with your closing statement?
I was just looking for the paper that I did on it recently. But be that as may, what I would like to say to the people of Grenada is that in relation to the economic outlook for our country, the minister himself in the budget presentation accepted that it's a difficult road ahead. And of course, that is true for most countries of the world. And knowing that there's a difficult road ahead, I imagine with a lack of vision, the government did not come with a budget that would meet the times or that would speak to the realities of that will face us going forward. So we in Grenada, being the resilient people that we are, the NDC, we urge on all of our people to engage yourselves in acts of self-reliance. We encourage you to engage in lots of backyard gardening, to look after yourselves and your family, farming, fishing. We know that our people are quite resilient and creative. We encourage our people to bring out those creative qualities and traits that we all have, because our government, in the budget that it has presented, has not shown that it will provide for us in the way that we ought to be provided for, with a bleak economic outlook ahead. I would like to join Kennedy in urging our people to renew the vigilance that you showed earlier in the year when the pandemic first got to our shores. As the chief medical officer said this evening at the press conference, we expect, in addition to the 28 cases announced today, a significant increase in the next 2 days. So all that has been said points to community spread, and therefore it is incumbent on all of us to act responsibly, follow the protocols. As Brother Kennedy said, do not go out if you don't have to. Abide by the restrictions imposed. In that way, you protect yourself and those around you. So play it safe, be good. The NDC is here, standing with you always, advocating for you always, and ready to lead you to a path of prosperity in a way that the NNP will never be able to do. So thank you and good night, and thank you for joining us. Thank you all of us for tuning in. Mikey and Junior and Mr. Kim Mills at Vibes FM, thank you all for sharing this platform with us and bringing the message of the NDC to the people of Grenada. Thank you.
Any very short, concise statements from Brother Lennox Andrews?
Yes, well, there are two things I would want to say. The first is that I would have liked this budget to be more motivating and stimulating with more hope. And for that to happen, I would have liked to see a package of fiscal incentives geared towards revitalizing and putting more persons to work in the agricultural sector. Fiscal incentives as regards the inputs and also as regards the market for our agricultural products. And then secondly, I would have liked to also see a section of the budget dedicated to the creative economy, which would put some hope in our young people. Creative economy, meaning that we will focus now on music, on arts, the performing art, the visual art. We focus on architectural designs and so on, yeah? And all of these things are what would attract and give our young people a sense of hope, a sense of new economic activity that they can get involved in. I mean, there is nothing in the budget onto the creative economy, which I think is something that comes out of that special period that we have just been through. So these are my two comments.
Thank you very much, Mr. Andrews, and we go to Dr. Gilchrist.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And just two areas I want to highlight in addition to what my friends have highlighted, which is health and education. If you keep in mind the theme of the budget, as said, recovery, transformation, and resilience. In that context, the Ministry of Health only got 7.7% of the budget. I would have liked to see that go up to about 10, 12%. You got to put more resources at the Ministry of Health to build resilience there, and also education. So in speaking to that part of the team, which speaks of transformation, I think the budget was a bit deficient in justifying that part of the team. To talk about transformation, we got to invest in education and in information technology. So we want to see more infusing information technology in education as a platform for achieving transformation, transforming your economy. You got to transform the mind. And when you transform the mind, everything else follows.
Thank you, Brother Gilchrist. Okay, so we've come to the end of our town hall. We thank you all, the listeners out there. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for taking your time off to listen to what the NDC has to say. We thank the listeners on our Facebook page, NDC National Democratic Congress of Grenada, Carriacou, Petite Martinique. The listeners on Mikey Live, 101.3 Vibes FM, Caribbean Unity FM, and Right Along Live with Junior George. We also want to thank those in the background, the technical team in the background, Brother Terry Forrester, Ron Campbell, Renee Thomas. And we want to remind you, the residents of Grenada, Carriacou, and Petite Martinique, to stay safe, wear a mask, stay apart. You don't know where your friend or associates have been. So stay safe and stop the spread. Thank you very much.
Drive Along Live, where everyone has a story to tell.